All right, folks, we're going to get going. We just started the broadcast online, so we shall kick things off. I wanted to just welcome everybody real quick. This has become an annual recurring thing. We and very successful, I might add. I think last year when all was said and done, when we added up everyone who was online and in the room, we had 70 plus participants. We're probably going to be slightly shy of that this year. We don't have, unfortunately, the most of the government folks participating. We have Leon Benjamin's in the room, who represents NATIS, but he's a series guy, not a Fed, so he's able to attend and participate with us. But anyway, thank you for coming and spending time. Hopefully, we've been trying to add enriched content year over year, not just provide update on the program itself and where we're at, but also some stories on the ground from not only our partners, network partners, but also from the users, NOAA, the primary benefactors, the sponsors of this program. Unfortunately, we had probably the best program set up this year in terms of users, and of course, as we all know, that was interrupted. So we have an interrupted agenda. We've made some changes to that. Here it is right here. I guess I can do it. Here's our agenda. Never good when there's a lot of red on the agenda, isn't there? Exactly. But we had Kirst Marshall, who's the program manager, obviously, with the Weather Service, Neil Jacobs, who was one of us here in the National Mesonet Program, now serving in a high capacity at NOAA, who's going to come and provide an address. We had the Tucson MIC was going to come up and give a presentation on usage, and we had a Western Region headquarters individual come down and talk about some transportation-oriented observational data. Unfortunately, all of them sent their respects, and they were very much looking forward to it. Their presentations were looking good, but we'll just pick it up again next year and go from there. But stepping in on their behalf, Dr. Brodsky will be providing an update on the New York State Mesonet. Jerry had a presentation yesterday morning, I believe it was. So he was prepared and willing to continue to participate at an extra level, so we thank him for doing that. Elizabeth, who I think everybody has gotten to know over the past year with Synoptic, she also had a presentation queued up, which she's giving tomorrow. What time is that tomorrow?
9:15.
9:15 tomorrow.
Do you want to hear it twice?
Absolutely. But for those who are not going to be sticking around and leaving, you'll be able to get that now. And for those obviously online who are joining us, we'll get to see both presentations. So thanks again to both of you for helping fill in. Jim King, who's right here, he'll be providing us an update from a prime contractor perspective. We've got some logistical things relative to the program, things we're working on, and Steve will primarily be giving along with Elizabeth. Last year, you remember we were talking about the establishment of an advisory board, which we did, and so we stood that up. We've had a number of meetings this year, some work effort ongoing, and both Clint and Dave, Clint's there, Dave's here, will be providing that update. And then back by popular demand, Kevin Kelly. Kevin, put your hand back there. Kevin, who has been with this program since the beginning, starting probably in 2005 to its Pathfinder program, UrbanNet, started in 2006, has been our Washington insider, our Hill worker, key to making things happen. And obviously there's a lot of fun things happening in Washington right now. Not all that affect our program necessarily, but Kevin's going to give us his readout on that. And then we'll have some discussion at the end. So from a logistical perspective, we have this room for 2 hours. Obviously the agenda's been changed a little bit. We've got a little bit of extra time, I think, relative to discussion at the end, but we want it to be interactive as well. So you don't have to sit on your questions until the end. Feel free to interject, raise your hand, get involved. Let's make this an interactive conversation. For those who are online, right now we have it muted, and we're going to keep it that way. In years past, we've run into some issues with background noise and things like that. So we're going to try to avoid that completely by keeping the lines muted throughout the bulk of the agenda. When we get to the end, and there are a couple of mechanisms, chat and question section. For those of you who are online, feel free to use either one of those. Anna Porteous is monitoring that, and will chime in if you have questions on your behalf. At the end, we'll try to open up the lines and just see how that goes during the discussion, so it's a little more free and open. Let's see what else. We have refreshments in the back, soda, coffee. Feel free to partake on that. We're not going to have a formal break throughout this time. We're just going to power on through the 2 hours, so get up and move around as necessary. Restrooms down the hall, either up or down in the lobby or up to the next level in the ballroom. And let's see, I think that's about it. Think of anything else? Yeah. Oh, introductions. Yes, introductions. So we don't want your life story. Just want to, Anna is going to, at the end, read out who is online. I'll hand you the microphone so that you can do that. But right now, I just want to kind of run through the audience here. And just introduce yourself in terms of who you are and who you represent.
Steve Wall from Synoptic.
Keith Brewster, Center for Analysis and Prediction of Storms, University of Oklahoma.
Elizabeth Wilson, Synoptic.
Jim Anderson, Earth Networks.
Peter Goebel, Colorado Climate Center.
Anna Porteous, Earth Networks.
This is Dave Dubois, New Mexico State University.
Dan Engel, New Mexico State University.
Marcus Hilton, Sonoma Technologies. Sean Weiser, North Carolina Climate Office. Kevin Kleisel, Oklahoma Mesonet OU.
Chris Funk from New Albany and New York State Government.
Hi, I'm Tom Schmutz from Flight Aerospace Solutions.
Jeff Rex from Flight, came up from Panasonic with the National Mesonet Program.
Clinton McDonald, Sonoma Technology.
I'm Pam Knox, Director of the University of Georgia Mesonet.
Bill Conway, Radiometrics.
Kevin Kelly, Clark Hill.
Arian Moore, National Weather Center, OU. Brad Ilston, Oklahoma Mesonet, OU.
John Horrell, University of Utah, Synoptic.
James Folks, FGC, KBR Wiley. Chris Gallagher, University of Utah, Synoptic Data.
Vinod Pokhran, Utah Climate Center, Utah State University.
Buck Lyons, Weatherflow, and also Synoptic. Joe Young, Synoptic Data. Alex Jakes, University of Utah, and Synoptic.
Leon Benjamin, NATIC.
Jim King, SGT, KBR Wiley. Russ Heilig, Davis Instruments.
Jim Apache, Davis Instruments.
Susan Apache, Davis Instruments.
Bob Moran, Weather Telematics.
Apurva Bajaj, University of Massachusetts, CASA Engineering Research Center.
And Drew Bronsky, New York State Mesonet, Urology.
Anna, if you could just tell us who's online.
Sure. Online we have Brenda Phillips, Chris Hubert, Dave Robinson, Jeff Anderson, Jenny Aikens, Nathan Edwards, Rick Fletcher, Ronald McHenry, and Tipsy Kimball.
Thank you so much. So a lot of our university partners online for sure. So with that, let's get into the agenda. And Jerry, if you could come on up. The handheld be okay for you?
That's fine.
And you can advance the slides right here.
Okay.
Or you can nod to me and I can do it.
Well, thank you. Boy, I missed that agenda that you had. That looked really good. Well, thanks for letting me do this. Some of you may have heard this yesterday, and of course we like to talk about our Mesonet, as do we all. So, but we
kid on the block, so we like kind of showing this off, so thanks for the opportunity. This is the talk we gave yesterday, just kind of a fun show and tell about all the different uses that people have for Mesonet data. And we're speaking to the choir here, but it's a lot of fun to talk about. So a little about the New York State Mesonet and how we got started. We really the idea for this got started back with Hurricanes Irene and Lee. That led to a lot of upstate flooding that wasn't really diagnosed real time by the Weather Service. There were a lot of gaps in the ASOS data network, of course, and so there was a lot of heavy rainfall that fell that really wasn't diagnosed. So a lot of flood warnings didn't go out that should have gone out, and that kind of started the idea of a need for the Mesonet in New York. And then Superstorm Sandy hit, and that led to the funding from the federal government to New York State to actually fund the Mesonet. And in total, they gave the state $30 million to invest in a network, a Mesonet network. And so that funding was provided in April of 2014, and within, it took really 4 years to complete the system, most of which was completed in about 2.5 years' time. And then we spent the remainder year and a half really getting up a lot of the data dissemination and some of the products in place. But this did have the support of the federal government and as well as the state, and so they've been very supportive of getting us off the ground. So this is the final product of those 4 years. We have what we consider 180 stations. What's not shown in this map are another 12 stations that I'll talk about later that we've installed with the Thruway, the Department of Transportation there in New York. And but we have a total of 180 stations, all reporting every 5 minutes. And altogether, it's something about on the order of 500,000 observations per day. And of course, all of that is in real time. And part of that is we provide 4,000 upper air observations per day. Prior to the Mesonet, we have 3 sites in New York that launch weather balloons twice per day, so 6 soundings per day across the state. Now we have something like 4,000 with these profilers added. I'll talk a little more about that. Altogether, we like to say we have 4 networks in one. We have the basic standard stations, but we also have these sub-networks. We have 20 sites that measure sweep. We have another 17 of these profiler sites. That's the yellow dots, if you can see real well. And then we have 17 surface energy budget sites, or flex stations. And those are the little red dots on the map. And of course, like all other Mesonets, and we collect all this in real time and apply quality control to that, and then disseminate that data back out to customers. And of course, all of that's archived and forever. So our basic network is really what drives the system. And there's 126 standard stations. We did copy off Oklahoma with a lot of this. I had a background at Oklahoma. I was a student with the Mesonet there, and so we took a lot of that technology and we worked very closely with Oklahoma in building out this system. And so the spacing is identical to what other Mesonets have. We have a station spacing of roughly 19 miles with at least 1 site in every county. Of course, the larger the county, the more sites have. The oddball sites are New York City. We're careful to place 1 in each borough, but these sites are on rooftops because there is just no ground space left in the city. So the closest we could get to the WMO standard was to put these on rooftops. So all of these sites are solar powered, except for the New York City ones that are sitting on buildings, and they all communicate through the cellular network, except for 3 very remote sites, and they have a satellite system that we use. So this is the variables that we measure. Again, kind of your standard variables, except for a few special ones. For solar radiation, the soil temperature and soil moisture we measure at 3 depths, 5, 25, 50 centimeters. We have a couple of sites with rock at 50 centimeters. And of course, the city, we don't have soil measurement because they're on the rooftops. But one unique thing about us that we've kind of copied off Delaware is that we have snow depth sensors. And being in New York, that's very important. users. And we also have cameras, and we can do that because we have the power and the bandwidth to send all those photos back. We take, the cameras are kind of aimed towards the north from every site. The cameras are mounted on the tower, and we have all of our gates on the north side, and our towers fold over. So they actually, we open the gate, we fold the tower over, and we face that direction with the camera. This is just a measure for security. But the cameras have really been interesting because we initially installed them to monitor vegetation height, snow depth, but now that we have these deployed and we're archiving all these images, we have lots of users wanting the camera data. We have, for instance, we got a call from the State Police Aviation Unit, and they were using our camera images to monitor when to fly into the Adirondacks, because they were using our cameras to monitor the low-level cloud deck, and they just had no information in the Adirondacks except for our cameras. So that was kind of a nice surprise. And this is just a photo of one of our more picturesque sites. I'd like to say they all look like that. A lot of them do, but not all. And this is out in the Finger Lakes area, but it's very typical of our station. You will notice we have a huge solar panel array, which we need in New York because of the low sun angle and the clouds. And we do have to heat several of our sensors, which you don't need to do further south. It's very typical, and like I said, it's just fold over a tower so we don't have to climb it in the wintertime. And again, I'm speaking of the choir here. We all know Mesonets are much more than just instrumentation. It's creation of products, it's working with the users, it's working with the private sector, it's working with a lot of government agencies. But it's more than just putting sensors out in the field. And that's, I think, an important point to make when we're talking to different communities about what we do. So, really getting to the heart of what I want to talk about, and that is data requests and our data policy. And so, we have a lot of different customers from different groups contacting us for data, kind of much like a climate audit. And so, because of the demand, we created this online data form shown here on the left that users can go in and fill out, and they select the date range and the stations that they prefer, and we have a data policy that explains the restrictions on the data. We do charge for data, at least for right now, and so if you're a private sector user or even a university, you do need to pay for data or just collaborate with us in some way. And so that's all spelled out in the data policy. But as part of this form, we ask each customer how they plan to use the Mesonet data. And it's just been a gold mine for understanding how the data is used. And it's really what I wanted to highlight with this talk. So we put this form online about after we had about half of our stations installed back in the middle of 2016. We had roughly 100 stations working by the end of 2016. And so people were already requesting data before the network was done, which, we were a little reluctant to give it out because, you're just starting to put out stations, you haven't really quality controlled much yet. But we were turning stations on live as we installed them, and so we started giving data out. And we really haven't been able to talk about our network because we wanted to give the state government a chance to kind of, spread the word themselves, but that time's passed now, and so now we can actually start talking about it. And but really spread by word of mouth. You've seen that each month we've had really more data requests from a variety of users. So that's a nice trend to see. Here's a breakdown of roughly the different groups requesting data. Since we've put up this data request form, we've had a total of 867 requests for data. And again, we don't really have people pay to do this, but it's part of our mandate. So, and again, some of these sectors are charged. And so if the data was all free, maybe these numbers would be different. But we do give our state government agencies free access to the data. And of course, the National Mesonet Program pays us the right of the federal government. This is only requests for archive data, so it doesn't include how the real-time data is used.
Jay, what's that blue section? How do we?
Oh, yeah. So,
repeat the question here.
Oh, yeah. The question was just the graphic is a little difficult to read, so what's the breakdown of the users? It's roughly 22% university researchers, and roughly a quarter government is the big blue pie. And in commercial sectors, 13%. Again, I think that will grow, will continue to grow, especially as we collaborate more directly with customers. And in private use, if someone requests data for personal use, then they get a free access to the data. And then site hosts also have free access, and that's 10% of the request. And then education, agriculture, and teaching.
Hold on, Jerry, we have a question from online.
The question is from Steve Kimball, and it's what's the percentage of your total funding generated by data requests?
Very small so far, because we really haven't advertised ourselves, and we're just now really reaching out to make data sales, so to speak. So pretty minimal so far. And here's a breakdown of the different variables that are requested. There's 17% that just request all the data that we collect. And but primarily, the three big variables are wind, temperature, and precipitation. Those are really the key. And beyond that, it's the other quarter is a mix of just about everything else. I should say that no one has really requested profiler data. We've had a few requests for flux data, but again, those are primarily for the research community at this point. We haven't advertised the profiler data a whole lot yet. I think once we have papers coming out about it and getting the word out, I think you'll see more demand. But with flux, with profilers, even with the SWE data, a lot of users don't know how to use that yet. Some do. The forecast community definitely does, and they're using it in real time. But yeah.
I was going to ask, is the WFO getting it from you guys directly or through NMP?
We send the standard data through MEDIS, and profiler data, we produce online imagery that the Weather Service uses. They use our website. We also send data through the Eastern region. So whatever they're not getting through MEDIS, they're getting through Eastern region. They also have all of our cameras displayed within the WFOs. So the different regional WFOs have their own cameras displayed over their region. That's pretty slick. Yeah. So we looked at those 867 data requests and just kind of broke down by category how the different sectors were using Mesonet data. And by far our, the reason for our existence is emergency management. So we work very closely with National Weather Service offices, as well as the state Department of Homeland Security dishes. And over here is one problem that we run into is a lot of the sectors don't employ meteorologists. And so a lot of times they may request weather data, but it's not really what they need. And so I would say dishes falls into that category. They know they need weather information, but that doesn't necessarily translate into better decisions. And so this was an example on the left here. We had a flooding situation going on in the state, but they really didn't know how to interpret some of the data that we were producing. So we actually had our field techs go over and join them live during the situation, and our guys helped them interpret the data. So it worked out really well. But here's a listing of just some of the requests for archive data from that community. And, each of these requests kind of surprised us. We didn't really expect a demand for data for insurance claims or fire investigation, at least not in just a year of operation. One interesting thing that's come up several times is we have several stations near ASOS sites. And those ASOS sites will go down because of a power failure or any number of reasons. And but our station is built to withstand, it's autonomous, solar powered, and so the Weather Service has used our data to fill in those gaps in ASOS records, which is, it's nice we can do that. and just a nice variety of things. So another sector that's really important in New York is the transportation sector. And given that we have a lot of winter weather, the weather data is very important to that sector. And so there's really two transportation groups within New York. There's what's called the Thruway Authority, which runs the toll booth, the toll highway across New York I-90, and then you have the Department of Transportation. We work very closely with the Thruway Authority, and the one big pushback we got after we installed the Mesonet was that we were a Mesonet, but they needed micronet information. And so the snow squalls, the snow bands coming off the Great Lakes were being missed by the Mesonet. And, we couldn't really respond to it because that wasn't our goal. We put a Mesonet in on a micronet. But we were stung by that criticism a little bit, and so we worked with them to kind of rectify that. And we came up with this micronet solution. And the Thruway, one thing they're good at is building signs. And so what you see here on the bottom right is they built basically a sign frame without the sign, and then we swooped in and put our sensors on it. And so we came up with this design for 12 stations. The yellow dots, 9 near Buffalo and then 3 around Syracuse, to help fill in some of those gaps. And we on their sign structure, we put a wind gauge, wind sensor, TNRH sensor, a camera, and a snow depth sensor. And that seems to be the information they need to help with their decision making. It's been a really good cooperation. Again, they don't have meteorologists employed, so we're continuing to work with them on how to help them interpret the data, how to use the data best. And that's leading to some research collaboration. So, despite not having meteorologists, they do request archive data, and it's some of the problems they're working on. They had an example where the road salt didn't work, and they're trying to figure out why. They're trying to come up with metrics on how to improve their operations, so they're working with us on that. And then there's been issues of flooding and such on county roads, and that's all helping them. So, but again, transportation has been pretty important to us. Another area, of course, is hydrology. Again, this is one of the emphasis behind why we have a Mesonet there. And, I didn't realize this, but basically the Catskill Mountains provide all the water for New York City. And so, of course, we have roughly a dozen or more weather stations across the Catskills. And so the Department of Environmental Protection of New York City has been very excited to use our data to help them with their hydrologic management. And so we've gotten a lot of data requests from them. But you'll see this list here. The data has been, again, just very important, both the soil moisture and the rainfall for these particular groups. Similarly, we've got a lot of requests from the air quality side. Just the wind and wind measurements and air temperature relative humidity have been very important for them, being better able to help with their air quality monitoring. Now, this is one example where the profiler data has been very helpful, because the DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation of New York State, has used our profiler data to monitor some of the fire smoke from, actually in our case, from Canada, has come down to New York, and they've been able to use the profiler data to see some of that smoke and aerosols filter down to the surface. And so they've actually modified their air quality forecast based on our profiler data. So that's been a nice example of how, in this case, the profiler data has impacted operations. So another big area for us is agriculture. About a third of our sites are sited on farms, on farmland. And farmers know how to use weather data better than I expected. And so this is just a short list of some of the different ways that they use data. And of course, there's so many different parts to agriculture. There's the planning phase, there's the planning of my day versus planning of, the season and next year. And so they use everything from they're looking at climatology data over the last 2 years, there's just so much of what we collect that's useful for them. A couple of couple of big areas in New York, dairy farms are big, so there's a lot of, a need for a cattle comfort index, which we haven't developed yet, but that's been requested. There are a lot of orchards in New York, so there's a lot of concern about frost and frost depth. There's a lot of crops grown, such as potatoes, that are very sensitive to soil data and temperatures. And there are a lot of vineyards and grapes in the state. So, of course, that's incredibly weather sensitive. So we have a lot of very happy vineyards in the state that they're going to plant now. And but again, some of these really surprised us, and I think the biggest surprise to me has been the need for weather data for insurance and permitting requirements. Whether you have a dairy farm or crops, there's a lot of reporting that's required for environmental reasons. And so the Mesonet has been very helpful in providing that weather information for them to fill out that paperwork and to keep track in a more accurate way some of the weather events that have hit their farm operations. And then there's education. And again, we don't have funding. We haven't reached out for funding to do this yet, and we really haven't advertised ourselves. But we do have roughly a dozen K-12 schools and another dozen universities that host sites for us. And they're clamoring for some kind of curriculum and help on integrating this data into their schools. And so this is a big to-do on our list, and but a big opportunity. And we're pretty excited about, again, all that we can do with this. And, of course, there's research. And this is just, again, a sample list of some of the more non-meteorology requests for data. Monitoring bats in the Adirondacks, of course, power usage, plant phenology, insect activity, bird activity. So, I mean, there's really no limit to what can be done on the research side.
Yeah. This would be back to the previous slide. You mentioned insurance. It's okay, don't remove it. But you mentioned insurance as a kind of a surprise coming in with particular data. Are they looking at it from a claims or a loss protection? What angle are they really looking at?
Claims. Yeah. Both from the farmers and from the...
Yeah. Using historical data to go back and do forensics?
They are. Yeah. And we have had some requests from the forensic meteorologists, but their caseload typically runs a few years behind. So I think in another year or two, we'll have a lot more forensic activity. And of course, on the teaching side, again, we're getting a lot of requests for curriculums and help in taking the data and putting it into the classroom. And of course, there's lots of other applications. This is just a few of the more interesting commercial applications. Golf course design. Never thought about that, but we've had a lot of requests from engineers building systems, building water treatment systems. Here is a request from the New York State Gaming Commission. Not quite sure what they were doing, but they're
betting on the weather.
right. There's tourism, there's of course the forensic meteorology. So, and it's just a sample. Public health is a big issue, and again, we weren't really thinking that when we started, but there's been a lot of concern, and especially in the New York City area, about the Legionnaire's disease, tick diseases, of course, big in the Northeast, and of course everywhere now, and bacterial growth. And then, of course, there's the power industry. Surprisingly, I always thought that, gosh, if the utilities take advantage of Mesonet data, they could save, millions of dollars in power load forecast. But the real interest is on the emergency management side, and not necessarily the power load side. So we've had a lot of requests, also on the renewable side, especially in New York, on both wind farms and solar farms. And some interest in profiler data from them. And then personal use, we've got lots of. But recently, someone had a bet to settle, so they needed some other data. And it turns out they lost the bet. But they still appreciate it. So just some final comments. We've been pleasantly surprised at the interest. You hope people are interested in Mesonet to install it, but they are. They're excited. And, it's also been fun seeing all the different sectors that have requested data. And again, this is what we were hoping for, but, it has been nice to see. I think one challenge is, how do you monetize this, to show the value? Is there a price tag you can put on someone settling a bet? Well, probably not. But for the gaming commission or for, some of the, for the DEP or DEC, there's a lot of value there, but how do you monetize that? Or value that in order to take that information and go to, say, the state government and say, hey, we're really providing some value here. Now one challenge, of course, is that everyone expects all weather data to be free. And, that's a challenge. We want to make it free, but, how do we keep that cost low? How do we, that's a tough thing to overcome. And then, of course, this is the same thing I said again, but sort of a continuing challenge of how do you demonstrate the value, or how do you quantify the value of your specific weather system, or in our case, different parts of the weather system, profilers versus the standard sites. And then to take that, say, to state government or even local governments to show, hey, this is a value for you to keep this going, and we need your help. So, with that.
Great, thank you, Jerry. Any other questions for Jerry? Back there.
Hey, Jerry, thanks. I was wondering if you could talk about, just briefly, media. Do they ingest the data real time? Are they on the nightly news? Do they put your logo? Do they advertise for you? Anything along those?
Right. No, that's a great question. And the short answer is we haven't reached out to them. And they, for the most part, don't know about us yet. We have an event. But we have an event planned, an open house, in February, where we've invited all of the TV meteorologists and reporters from across the state to come and see what we're about. So we haven't reached out yet. We're not on any of the programs yet, on the local channels, but we hope that will change.
On National Weather Person Day.
That's right, on National Weather Person Day, February 5th, I believe.
Yeah, thanks. I really enjoyed your presentation on the analytics, your analytics of how your data is being used. I noticed that among the things that you're collecting, you have temperature, wind speed, solar, and humidity. Are you calculating ET and providing that? And if not, are people asking for it?
A few farmers have asked for it, but we don't calculate that yet. We do have the flux station where we measure that directly, but we've not done really much at all with it yet.
Thanks.
But, yeah, great question.
Just a quick question, Jerry. Great presentation. Would you mind if we republish it on the National Mesonet website?
I think that would be fun. Yeah, probably.
We'd like that. Oh, please.
Yeah, we'll look through it with that in mind, but I think most of it is.
Okay.
Yeah, just think about it. We won't do it right away. I'm sure you give us the go ahead. I would say, relative to monetization, there are some examples, obviously, with media in terms of how to do that. You come from local, we're at OU, and they do that with their Mesonet. So there's an example for you to draw off of in terms of one market area, at least in terms of monetization. Anything else? Anybody else? Okay, if we give Jerry a hand. Next up, Elizabeth Wilson. Go ahead.
Yeah, so as Bill said, I'm actually giving this presentation tomorrow at 9:15, so if you want to hear it again, you're welcome to come. So I'm going to preface this first. So this is just a small subset of success stories from the program. I'm sure you all have plenty of them, so please, come to me, tell me after the meeting, email me, call me, whatever. I'd like to have, a huge running list that we can put on, the website and share when you do, lobbying activities on the Hill. So, I'm talking about, an inside look at the benefits, impacts, and successes of the NOAA's National Mesonet Program. So I'm sure all of you know, but just, an overview of the National Mesonet Program. So it started as a regional pilot project in 2006. It was an UrbanNet, congressionally directed, pilot project. Observing weather and climate from the ground up, a National Academy of Sciences report in 2008 that established the need to aggregate data from all sources, public and private. And then it became a NOAA-funded program in 2009. So there's about 40 data providers now, private companies, academia, universities, state mesonets. We provide about 35,000 stations and platforms. So there's, the nationwide surface data, there's profilers, boundary observations, and then aircraft data. It's just, some of the data that it provides. So like I said, by leveraging all these assets from, federal and non-federal, public and private, the NMP is able to fill these large time and space gaps that if, the National Weather Service and forecasters were just relying on these ATOS stations, there would be large gaps without all the data from the providers filling those gaps. So this allows, the NWS to improve on their mission, which is, enhancing the national economy and the protecting life and property. So just real quick, what some of the data is used for. Jerry talked about how some of his data is used. So this is for kind of NOAA specific. They use it for numerical weather prediction, mainly high resolution rapid refresh modeling, short-term forecast modification, situational awareness, so when to or not to issue a severe weather warning, and then post-event analysis. So this is just a little image of all of so we get data from all 50 states, and then some of the territories goes into the National Mesonet Program, and then we have all of our, state partners, and then our commercial partners. So I'm just going to go over a couple of stories that I got from some of our partners. So first, starting with Coastal Carolina University. They've been doing an ongoing onshore wind resource study. So they have 2 SODARs located in South Carolina, and this study has been going on for years. It was initially established with Vizsla and a couple of the utilities in the area, and then it evolved into a partnership with Iowa State in 2016. Their data is shared, with the National Mesonet Program. So results of, their wind resource study is that the SODAR data that they got from these SODARs is showing that the velocity gradient in the lower atmosphere was actually steeper than originally thought and modeled. So this means that the wind resources near the surface are better than were originally thought. And so they can use newer and taller generations of wind turbines to tap this potential that originally people didn't think there was any onshore capabilities for South Carolina. So they actually sent this data off to NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and they're going to be doing a new wind resource assessment map that's going to reflect some of these changes. And this is energize the wind industry in this area, especially they're exploring in South Carolina now. So it's both domestic and international private companies. They said I've been coming to them and talking about, wanting to put wind turbines and tapping the potential here. So now we have Hurricane Michael from the University of Georgia. And thank you to Pam for this information. So as we all know, last year we had a couple of bad storms last year. In October, we had a Category 4 storm that made landfall in Florida and did a lot of damage, and then, tracked across Georgia. So one of the highest wind gusts in Georgia was measured by a Georgia Mesonet station. I don't know if this has a pointer, but in the bottom left of the picture, this 115 wind gust was measured by a UGA Weather Network station at the Donaldsonville Airport. This observation was also included in the final storm report that's going to be put out by the NHC. And, as the storm travels through Georgia, this just speaks to, how good their stations are. But all the stations stayed online and were operating except for 2. So all of that data was going to the Weather Service, and they were able to see all this as the storm was real time. And then if not for this station, these winds may not have been measured if the station wasn't there. I have a good quote, you know, you guys can read it, but a forecaster from, Peachtree City, Georgia, WFO, said, he went and did a site study after a survey after the storm. And this was the station that stayed standing through that 115-mile-per-hour wind gust. And he said that as far as he can tell, pretty much every station from amateur up to, you know, the federally funded ASOS stations went down except for their stations and then this one that recorded that 115-mile-per-hour wind gust.
You can take all the credit right there.
Is there anything else I wanted to add?
Yeah, you want to add?
Right, I mean, we run all Campbell Scientific stations, and, we have a pretty rigorous method. That station had been visited 3 months before, and some of the sensors replaced at that point. They did lose the solar panel because it was just like a sail, and that probably saved the station when it blew off, because otherwise you could see some of the wires on that were loose, but the station itself stayed upright, and it was pretty much right in the eye wall. This is the first time that we've had a hurricane directly hit Georgia in over 100 years, so we haven't had a chance to test it before. And so we only lost that solar panel. Another of the stations lost their anemometer. A couple of the stations went down temporarily because of cell problems with the cell network, not because our stations weren't recording. And we did have one problem with our server, which of course we have a universal power supply on, but the battery was low, so we lost communications for a couple hours while they tried to replace the battery in the universal power supply. So don't wait till the last minute is the answer. But I'm really pleased that the station did as well as you could ever expect. We had very little problems with data quality. We didn't have to make a lot of changes to that. A couple of the stations tipped over a little bit, I think, as well. But no, it's really, really good. I will say that we would have more of our stations on the final map, but we feed into Matus, but we do not feed into Meso West. And the Weather Service likes Meso West for their graphics capabilities, and so they had to hand enter the Donaldsonville station to get it on that map. And so there's a bunch of other stations that also recorded quite a bit of high winds that probably aren't going to be on the final map.
Yes, thank you. So just a second success story was from Western Kentucky University. Back in 2017, they had a major flash flooding event. They had about 7.5 inches fell in 24 hours. So there's a map, a Weather Service map that shows some of the rainfall and then just some of the damage from it. But the Weather Service in that area used a station from the Kentucky Mesonet in Maysville, and Maysville was what had most of the damage. That's where the damage photos are from. They used information from that to issue a warning with enough time for people to evacuate and get to safety. And there's a news story actually about this too as well, and they credit that to why there were no fatalities with this event. So the next two slides are a lot of words, so I won't read them all to you. It's mainly just to show you this is the kind of National Weather Service focus. Because this is a NOAA-funded program, we want to make sure the Weather Service is getting, use out of this data. We want to understand how they use it, the benefits to them, the value to them. So I reached out to some of the WFOs. So again, if any of you have partnerships with your local WFOs, let me know, put me in touch with them so I can talk to them, get, quotes, stories, information from them, how they use this data, because it's very important for us to have, like I said, especially when we do, our lobbying efforts. So this is just a couple of quotes from the Weather Service. So on the right is someone in Lubbock, Texas. So he's just explaining how without the West Texas Mesonet, there was a lot of spatial gaps in the state. So the West Texas Mesonet was allowing him to have more data, more information, better situational awareness when he's doing forecasting. The bottom picture is we're going to have someone speak to this, and he could not come because of the shutdown. So I'll speak to it a tiny bit. But this is an internal National Weather Service Western Region Headquarters application called Metro. That's Model of the Environment and Temperature of the Roads. So it's using road weather data from the NMP. They, assimilate it, put it into this model, and then they can tell road weather conditions, so moisture, snow, that type of thing on roads in the area. And then again, just a couple more quotes. This image in the bottom left, it's kind of hard to see, but they're showing the monitor on the right. They actually have the Kentucky Mesonet data up in their weather forecast office, along with, all of their other information. I thought this quote was kind of interesting. Sean Harley from Jackson, Kentucky said that he's been there for 22 years and that in his early days, they had to call fake thermometers to try and get an idea of the temperature across their area because they just didn't have any information. So I think this just speaks and underscores the fact that this data is extremely helpful. Now, back then they just didn't have it and they had to resort to crazy measures to get it. So I think it just shows that, this data is extremely important. And lastly, just a little flavor of sectors that are actually using data from the NMP. So obviously the government, with NOAA and the National Weather Service. We have renewable energy and utilities, fire weather, precision agriculture, emergency responders, and then transportation. So this is just an idea of who actually uses data and finds value in it. So that is all. If you guys have any questions.
Any questions?
I was wondering, if you could talk about, hi, I'm Purva Bajaj with the Casper Engineering Research Center, and I was wondering if you had any examples of, uses by emergency responders that come to your mind?
I'm trying to think. I don't think I have any specific from them. I mean, did you want to add to that? Or?
I was just gonna say last year, so obviously, last year we had the Las Vegas WFO speak, right? And I believe that presentation is up on the NMP website, right? And it was a great example of really a non-weather use of Mesonet, where they were modeling gas releases, because of the city. So pretty interesting. Fluid release, sorry.
Yeah. So I was not at the last meeting, but yeah, on here I guess one is the flash flooding event. I mean, they had emergency responders go out and help after that event. So it might not be specific to that, but they were definitely involved in the process. But yeah, if you have any stories, feel free. I take everything. I need everything. So that would be great.
All right, anything else? Elizabeth, great, thank you, Elizabeth, appreciate it. Jim.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you, Elizabeth. Great presentation.
Jim.
Oh, it's, oh, okay. Okay.
All right, so just a quick update from SGT. We're the prime contractor for the National Mesonet Program. We're really pleased and happy with the successes of the program. I think the stories that we're hearing today are evidence of that. It's a great example of a public-private partnership that works. Government is very much looking for public-private partnerships, and this is one that has great number of success stories, has a nationwide footprint, and really a lot of very broad appeal. So we're looking forward to continued growth and expansion of the program. You'll hear more about that from some of the later presenters. Just in terms of general news from us, so we were acquired by KBR Wiley in April of 2018, and we'll be rebranding as KBR Wiley this month in January going forward. So you'll see that change on the website, as well as possibly change in some of the communications that you get from our primary partners, Synoptic and Earth Networks, who are under subcontract to us, and then you guys are second-tier subs to us. And we're really very pleased to have you all part of the program, and the program is very successful from our perspective. So very happy about that. Another piece of news is that the website, we did do a update. So release 2.0 was released last fall. And really the emphasis there was improved mobile rendering, and then really on content management and being able to tie partner content directly to the partners who were contributing that content in a very explicit way. So it's really a good way for you guys to advertise your Mesonets, your programs, whether they're public or private. And we encourage you to send success stories to both Elizabeth and Lawrence Page, who's our webmaster. And so we look forward to getting those. And then the last thing.
Before you go on.
Oh, sure.
But the one thing I wanted to, is it working? One of the things I wanted to point out relative to the website, for the reasons, we did it for multiple reasons, but one primary was, and Kevin might allude to this, is it's a quick way to get news about this program and visibility on this program to the Hill. Very important people in terms of continued funding for NOAA and the National Weather Service and their mission, but also this key program, which is important to them and important to us as well. And we need to have, it's very, we go in and we talk to the staffers and so forth. They ask a lot of questions about the program, and being able to show them this and leave them with this link, they can peruse it themselves later and see all the great work that's going on out here across the country with all the non-federal partners. So that was another key reason for establishing it.
Absolutely, that's a great point. Yeah, particularly the staff on the Hill. I mean, you leave behind paper material, people aren't looking at it, right? They go right to the website. So it's really important for us to get this established in the first year of the contract, renew it, refresh it in the second year. We'll look to continue to make improvements. If anyone has any ideas or suggestions or content, please send it on to the contacts here. I really appreciate it.
And we link to all of the individual network.
That's exactly right.
Websites as well.
Yeah, so if there's any new contact information for you guys or any new information that you'd like up there, please do send it in. We appreciate it. And then the third thing I wanted to let everyone know is that we are coming up on a recompete year. We're expecting the NOAA National Weather Service RFP sometime in late spring, early summer. The leadership team is prepared for receipt of that. We've been working on innovations and new strategies for program expansion going forward. Working with the advisory board, who you'll hear a little bit about in a few minutes, looking at ways to continue to improve the program, build capacity, and other things that are needed and that we're hearing from stakeholders and on the Hill. And we want to make this as interactive as possible. When you hear the advisory board speak, if you have contributions, please don't be shy and speak up. So we'll also be putting out a request for a letter of commitment. For those of you who've been with the program, it'll look very much like the prior letter of commitment that we requested. And so I don't think there'll be any surprises with that. And we look for your continued participation in the program. So any questions for me?
Great, Jim.
Okay, thanks very much. Steve.
Hi, everyone. Steve Wall from Synoptic Data. As was mentioned, we're kind of a tier 1 subcontractor and administer contracts and information for about 25 of the partners within the program. So what I'm going to do today is just kind of review a little bit, look forward a little bit, and we talk to folks a lot. So none of this should be really new news, but nonetheless, it's worthwhile to take a step back, look at where we've been as we lay out a map for going forward. So we just finished year 2. Year 2, of course, was only 8 months long, but it ran from January to September of 2018. We really did get a lot done. The first year was really just kind of getting up to speed. Year 2 is where we really started to put in some of the new positive changes that we've been working towards. First off was the Board of Advisors. We talked about it. We'll talk about it more later on, so I'll just touch on it here. We're really excited about it. We think it's worked out really well, and we're looking forward to that to continue to be a very robust portion going forward as the program continues on and matures. One of the big tasks we put the Board of Advisors to immediately was sort of looking at the various networks, understanding the various categories and considerations and types of networks and things like that, and sort of trying to figure out where everyone fits, where all the different types of networks and equipment fit in the grander mosaic. So we can talk about that as much as we want to, but it was a pretty significant drill, and I think it was a very useful drill. Hopefully people felt that it was inclusive started that process in year 2. We were staged to implement some of that, take a step towards that in terms of the compensation for year 3, but we were able to get some extra funding. So really, we didn't have to kind of adjust anybody negatively, and some networks were able to get increases that were reflective of what their networks are contributing. So we'll talk about that. So really, the big thing about that is just to be implementing a very formulaic approach to the compensation, so that like stations are treated like across the whole program. We did do a sort of a morale survey from the partners back in the fall. We didn't see anything really real major problems. I think the biggest takeaway from us, sort of from the organizational and management perspective, is you can never over communicate. So we're going to put some things into place this year. We've been trying. We came up right on the holidays right after that, but as we go through 2019, expect to see kind of more consistent and hopefully useful communications. The website is a critical part of that. It's there all the time. We'll send out periodic things, and then everything will be available through the website afterwards. We had a really exciting meeting this fall also. I don't see Brad in here, but the folks from Bayer, which is the company that bought Monsanto, which bought Climate Corp, sponsored a survey for whoever wanted to come involved, and the idea is to be looking at agricultural mesonets that are used in agricultural applications, and looking at some specific issues that have arisen over the last couple of years, and then kind of looking at it more generally. I think there were probably 35 people there, lots of National Mesonet partners. I found it really interesting because it was like, pun intended, let's get our fingers down in the dirt and understand kind of some of the problems that are going on and how this data is being used in a real micro way. So we really appreciate Monsanto Bayer putting that on. Brad Coleman talked about that may become an annual event, so we'll be paying attention to that. But again, I thought it was just really successful, and everyone I talked to from the various mesonets, I think, had a great time and found it very useful as well. So later on in the fall, we still have a couple stragglers in, but before the holidays, we put out the inventories, a survey for all the networks to submit their inventories to us, to make sure we are aware of all the stations that are in your networks, that we have sort of a standard set of variables and parameters recorded for each of those types of stations, and we'll be putting that all together into kind of one big, useful database that will be available for us for a variety of purposes. We were able to bring on a number of new partners over the course of year 2, and we'll continue that into year 3. I'm going a little bit off my head, so forgive me if I forget anybody, but Montana, Wyoming came on board. We're working right now for Indiana and Minnesota. We're hoping, I'm going to meet later on today with the Mount Washington Observatory folks, so up in the Northeast. So as we kind of come across professional mesonets that are appropriate for inclusion in the program, we've been working hard to bring them in. In the map that Elizabeth showed, and actually it's on one of mine because I stole her graphic. We want all the lighter blue ones to the extent that we can. We want to get those dark blue with a partner in every state, because just from a programmatic perspective, that makes it much stronger, much easier to defend and get advocacy for. So, but that being said, we have to be fiscally responsible. We can't bring on infinite numbers of networks and compensate them the way people have been historically. So it's a balancing act. But we've been able to, for this time, bring on those mesonets, and are looking at a couple other smaller ones now. Good news collection. Elizabeth touched on it. Jim touched on it. Please share your stories with us. We want lots of variety and lots of quantity of different types of good news stories, how the mesonets are being used. Jerry's great presentation today. We use those when we go to the Hill as a big thing. You go into a senator's office or a representative's office, and you can show a story from their state. People latch on to that. It's human nature. It's like, oh, that's my hometown, and I remember that flash flood or whatever it might be. So please, we beat this drum pretty consistently. We'll continue to. please share your stories with us, and we'll use them and make them available in a variety of forums. If you have any concerns about not wanting them in some places, just let us know, and we'll certainly work with that. And that got to the advocacy of how we work with them. So that was year 2. Lots of that is continuing in year 3. So year 3 started in September, goes through September 2019. These are the kind of the focuses that we're continuing most of the things that we started. This year we're really we really want to understand the data flows as much as possible. Make sure we understand what's going on, what's going in, what's coming out. And so we're implementing a program this year where Synoptic, I have John Porro in the back, Chris Galley in the back, Alex Jakes, and Joe Young. They head up the technical side of things. We're setting up basically a database and a processing system where we want to understand the data that you're putting in. We'll go around to the back end of Mayo, see what's coming out, make sure everything we think is going in is getting in, understanding how it's being used. And so we'll be setting up, just kind of making connections with folks over the course of the next month or 2, really to kind of set up a schedule so that we have this program up and running here in year 3. It'll continue to evolve and get a little bit more sophisticated. We want for that to be, to the extent possible, a resource for the actual partner networks to use as well, to understand your data, maybe even take over some of the reporting that you all are now having to do for us, manually every month.
Steve, if I could just chime in real quick on that. Another reason for the motivation behind that, and that is, and we've harped on this before, this is a data buy, and we have some self-monitoring requirements on us to make sure that our partners are doing what they're saying they're doing, and it's a contractual obligation that we have to the government. So we have to be able to demonstrate that the amount of data that we are charging the government for is actually being delivered. And so that's another primary motivation why having this in place can help us make sure, do some self-monitoring, and that everybody's doing what they're saying they're supposed to do.
And exactly right. Compliance with this contract, and then again, Jerry touched on it. Lots of Mesonets are looking for other ways to monetize their data, to help support the networks, the operations and maintenance. And so, just by having sort of this, at least having a metadata repository and knowing what's out there, we can kind of help you do that. So, it's certainly aimed at compliance with National Mesonet, but it'll probably have some good follow-on effects as well. So the Board of Advisors, again, we'll talk about it some more, but it began last year. We'll be looking to them to flesh out their sort of roles and responsibilities as we go forward, and Clint and Dave will talk to that a little bit more. Talked about the new partners. I neglected to add in, actually, Davis was a new partner during the course at the beginning of year 2. Excited to have them as sort of a different kind of data category. We'll continue with good news. We'll continue with the advocacy. And then next slide, please. Obviously, with the recompete coming up, that's going to be a big drill for a set of us. We'll use that station inventory. Will be sort of one of the exhibits in the proposal. So we're glad to have that kind of done and out of the way before the actual proposal or solicitation drops. So we'll keep doing that. We want to improve collaboration between all the folks here. We all have a lot to learn from each other. I think every time we get together, people learn different things. So I think it's really good. We talked about the formulaic funding. So we've taken sort of a partial step towards that in year 3, which we're in right now. And our plan is that the proposal will be based on that formulaic funding, and that'll come into place in what I call year 4. So really year 1 of the next contract. Funding growth, we'll talk about that. Kevin's going to come up here in a little bit. We are always looking, all of us in this room have lots of great ideas of things we could do if we had some more money. So we work hard to try and get more money from NOAA and the National Weather Service. We spend a lot of time and effort and brain power on how best to do that. And then we have to figure out, okay, if we get the money, how do you intelligently spend it, things like that. So Kevin will talk to it, you know, right now for FY19, which will fund next year, I don't think we know. We're not gonna take a cut, but there's some plus-ups that have been proposed, but may or may not, come through, so, we'll see. So we remain flexible. Next, please.
That's it. Yeah, so a question from online, before we get to any in-room, and you might want to chime in on this too. So it comes from Siska, and she's asking about the timeline relative to the solicitation and the current funding, and kind of what happens as the solicitation comes out, we burn through the summer, we get to the fall award, and so forth. So what is the timeline associated with that?
Well, I mean, and Jim certainly jump in as needed, but just in general, the idea, you know, the program is intended to, it's a year-to-year program. So National Weather Service is motivated to have the new contract in place on September 17th, 2019. They don't want to miss out on the data. You know, it looks like the procurement process, because of some of the details of the process of the type of contract and the amount of the contract, is being pushed a little bit later than we sort of expected. But again, I think, you know, NWS is going to be motivated to have it on, you know, in place and running. You know, the whole process may be compressed from being several months long to being a month or two. But we'll work with that.
Yeah, so we've been in contact with the Acquisition and Grants Office at NOAA. And so, you know, we've had a number of contacts with them, and most recently they had indicated they expected some delays. They had originally hoped to have it awarded by the end of the government fiscal year, but our contract does go through January of 2020, our current contract, right? And so, you know, we're anticipating that it's going to be pushed out a little bit, and I suspect that this shutdown that we're all, you know, in right now will actually push it out at least several more weeks, right? If not double that, right? So, you know, I would expect something, an award of a new contract closer to December, January 2020 than to the turn of the fiscal year. So, despite NOAA's best efforts and their desires. So
just to clarify that, Jim, it's certainly my understanding that then, in those types of situations, we saw this in the past, is they'll take some money from somewhere else to cover the 3 months after September.
Yeah, they'll do what they need to do to keep the funding going. Their intent is there would be no gap in service. So if anyone has any questions or any follow-on concerns, feel free to give me a call or email me, and I'll be happy to talk further about it.
Yeah, and certainly that's, you know, one of the things we'll be putting on in our periodic communications and updates on that, timelines and things like that, as we know. But yeah, so again, what I want people to take away is, NWS, as Jim said, NWS doesn't want a gap in service. They'll work the contract as needed, and no gap in service means no gap in compensation. So you never say never, but that's what we want. That's what we're aiming towards, and that's what I would expect.
Absolutely. And just one other thing, for all the partners, Doug Hayes, who works for me, is in charge of running the recompete for us. And so he'll be working very closely with myself, with Bill, and with Steve. And he'll be sending out a communication to everybody in the near future, just looking for this letter of commitment. And if you have any questions, you can contact either myself, Steve, or Bill. Ask us any questions you have, or Doug, obviously. And we want to get those letters turned around pretty quickly. We're modeling after what we had done before, with university participation in mind, with state participation in mind. And so, you know, there are not going to be a lot of terms and conditions. Very simple, very straightforward, just like what we did before. So thanks very much for turning those quickly. We appreciate that.
Any other questions for Steve? Okay, great, thank you. On to the advisory board list.
Thanks, Steve. Quentin McDonald, Sonoma Technology. I'm gonna, with Dave Dubois, we're gonna talk, give everyone an update just on our advisory board activities. And I think we can just take a step back for starters to lay out what our objectives were. First off, we wanted to provide the program leaders here guidance overall to ensure that all the partnerships are successful. And really, this was their idea, and to get everyone involved and instigated. So I think overall, we'll talk about that in a second, it's going really well. We also wanted to have a conduit for all the partners to be able to reach out to the program leaders and leadership team to bring up issues and discuss ideas. And again, another theme of this program is really to strengthen the transparency of it. And through the board and board activities and the board being partners in this, we were able to see transparency, which can be reflected to all the partners. And finally is to really work on strengthening the program each year through various initiatives. And we'll talk a little bit more about this year's initiative in a minute. So the current board members, David Robinson, Siski Kimball, John Schroeder, Dave Dubois, and myself, Quentin McDonald. And so I think we've been on since the beginning of the year. And so the process, at least this year, has been, we had an in-person meeting with the board members and program leaders. I believe that was in the spring, time flies. And really our goals of that first meeting was to figure out how we're going to operate and so forth and set our initiative. From a board perspective for a first year, I think our observations are that it's working quite well. It's meeting the objectives that we set out. And, we hope that, in terms of the board's role of being a conduit for all the other partners, that's also working. And if not, we need to hear from you on how we can make that better in this coming year. Again, our board actions for this past year was first to establish the process. How's this board going to work? How are we going to interact? And then to determine what key initiatives need to be addressed. And then finally, well, let's tackle those initiatives. And for this year, as was mentioned earlier, our objective was to look at making the compensation formula objective and make sure that it was fair for all the partners. And so this was a big undertaking to look at this. And the process to do that and the results, so we looked at various compensation models, how it could be done. And in the end, we came up with a tiered structure that really met the objectives of ensuring that it was really fair for all the partners. And with that, there's been multiple tiers established. The majority of the data either falls in this professional plus or professional category, and then there's data aggregators and so forth and some other ones. But a lot of our time was spent trying to distinguish between the professional plus and professional. And part of the things that went into that were, reporting frequency, how often is it, what quality control is done, are the sites calibrated at what frequency, and so forth. So we really took a user's approach about how sites are operated in the real world to ensure, because we recognize that it takes a lot of effort to maintain and QA sites at a really high level. So we established criteria that's very objective for determining that, and we refer to literature on how other sites are done, through EPA and other sources. And in the end, I think the net result is the good news is the compensation that was provided before. Well, the results were actually pretty similar, but through this process, it did identify a few very undercompensated providers, which I think it's gotten straightened out through this process. So I think overall, as a first-time board member in this program, I felt like the process was very open, objective. Everyone had their opinions heard, and I really think it was a consensus building exercise that resulted in the current structure. With that, I'll hand it over to Dave. I think he's going to speak to next year's initiatives.
Yeah. So I got some feedback too on on the tier structure, and I hope to
if there's any other, comments on that, I think we can still, take those and talk about them as, on the board. And, the main thing is getting that input to the whole team. So yeah, so I mean, I started out as, as a public entity, as part of this, fairly new into the process, and I think it's so far it's been working out pretty well. I think for the smaller operations like ours, as opposed to the bigger ones that have been in there for a long time. So, there was some that got some little less funding, but but that's part of, as we document the formulaic, the structure, the objective method, that hopefully we'll get to see how that works and it all makes sense. So if you go to the last slide of our advisory board. Just kind of talking about some of the things so what is the advisory board? What's our purpose and what are we supposed to be doing? We're sort of bouncing ideas on, as things come in some new initiatives, like for instance, capacity building. Maybe there's some new technology out there to provide incentive seed project money. I think, looking at building infrastructure is I don't know how much money would be available to that. I think somebody else could probably come in on that, but it's more the advisory board is coming in as providing those ideas, giving those, okay, so here's some other, we'll talk a little bit about some of those in there, like new technologies, drones, things like that, upper air, or maybe could be part of that. And then, we're always looking for how do we better represent our partners. I know I've dropped the ball a few times, I've been a little slow, but that's kind of how we learn how to do this, and if we definitely give us feedback on how to better, how we can serve you guys, as part of our job here as a board. And just other ideas of filling in data gaps, as we look at the map across the U.S., looking at, so where should we start engaging other areas, both in the horizontal and vertical, the spacing, and, looking at upper air. Focusing on other data. For instance, unfortunately, we've had a lot of natural disasters that really would benefit from, looking at more information out from the field for fires, wildfires, all over the place, and hurricanes, of course, with Georgia giving a great example of how others can benefit to help out responders. And then also looking at, like I mentioned earlier, about looking at new measurement technologies out there. Some of them are pretty immature right now, but as time goes on, at what point do we need to really start looking at them, like mobile drones, camera-derived weather information? I think there's one company now. What's the name of it? Is already starting to ingest the camera. Helios. Is it? Harris. Yeah, Harris Corporation. So that kind of information. So how do we address those? How do we incorporate those into our tier structure in the compensation package, things like that? And then coming up with, so in terms of the board, we're designed to be a representative, so we need to have other people come in, cycle through the board in terms of how we do things, what is our mission, we have here terms of engagement, identifying new board members, so how long do we stay on the board, and who should be on the board, and kind of our mission. I think we're still working through some of those things, and I think I definitely could be a better board member in terms of engaging the folks in our area that I have responsibility over. So I apologize for those who have dropped the ball. But I think that's kind of, working out the bugs, and so how do we do this and better serve and be a conduit of information. And I don't know if you have any other things to add in terms of the charter part.
I mean, I guess I would, just on the new board members, I believe our current plan right now is the current board members would serve through through 2019, essentially, whether it's September or December or January. So with that, let me first say, being on the board is great. But we would want new board members to step forward and have representation from the various partner types. And so as part of our initiatives for 2019, we want to work to have a transition, and not just have it all of a sudden, okay, we're out, you're in. So, our expectation would be, late summer, early fall, to have an idea of who's interested in joining the board. And so we have a little bit of an overlap period, so that when 2019 starts, you guys will be ready to roll.
Yeah, it's important to have, to go through different, how do we represent, the various sizes and different types of networks out there. So that's kind of how thinking about how we recruit for those in the board. The composition is going to be important. We don't want to bias it toward one side. We need to have the equal say. Yeah. So any questions for Clinton and I as board questions? I know Dave Sitsky and I don't know who else is on the board is on the call. If you guys have any other things that you'd like to bring out.
Dave, we do have one question from the from online. I'll just read it. Could you address how the standards fail to address instrument performance specifications? Very cheap equipment and correspondingly garbage data can't qualify for professional plus. Many of us fear a race to the bottom.
But this is Steve. I'll just kind of jump in. I'm not particularly concerned about that. I think, the partners in the network or in the program right now are, professional grade networks. As we've talked about, we did bring in Davis this year, which is really an exciting opportunity because there are a lot of good Davis stations out there. They don't just operate it as their own Mesonet like the rest of us do, but we brought them in. Compensations are appropriate to the types of stations and the types that they're operated by. So I do not expect, we're not giving, the stations are compensated appropriately according to their value, how they're maintained, the kinds of equipment and things like that. Maybe a specific question was in there is, in the survey, we're asking about the types of equipment that people have and looking to document that. Quite honestly, in this first stage, we can't. It's just not appropriate, nor desirable, nor accomplishable to say, okay, if you have this kind, an RM Young Windbird versus a Sonic versus a whatever, we're not getting down to that level of granularity. And there's probably an argument to be made we never want to get down that far, but we certainly can't do it now. We're starting to gather the data that may let us be able to do that in the future, but we'll have to decide whether we really want to or not. So, and also, it's important, we have to live within the constraints of the budget where we don't put aside a lot of money for kind of, side projects and things like that. We put the money out to the operators. So for any significant growth, we're going to have to be successful at getting more money for the program, from DC or from other sources. So I don't know if hopefully that helps. That answers most of it.
Anybody else? I didn't understand the question. What did that mean, race to the bottom? I would like to understand it better because I think this is a very important issue.
So the comment from the back was to understand. So I'm not sure who put that in.
Was that Nathan?
Yeah. So Nathan, if you want to amplify any more, you can. I think so. Let me just assure everybody, you can't go out. No one here can go out right now and buy a bunch of low-end, inexpensive weather stations, put them in, and expect that their compensation is going to go up. They buy twice as many as they currently have. They're not going to get twice. That's not the way it's working. We're very aware of it, but we do these surveys to understand.
We just unmuted Nathan. I don't know.
Go ahead, Nathan.
Oh, so I guess the concern was the way that I had read the standards is if the exposure is appropriate, if the sighting is appropriate, if the metadata is appropriate, if the maintenance is appropriate, that I could put out literally like $500 sensors and get the same compensation. I mean, like a $500 station. There's nothing in there about like things like basic things like, for example, like whether or not a temperature can be just has to be like even shielded. For example, there's common packages out there that are single pack weather stations that have unshielded temperature on them. Those kinds of things go for maybe around $1,000, and that's not the kind of I think that's not the kind of data that you guys want to get or that no one wants to get. And I don't know, that was like the concern that some of us have been talking about.
Okay, so this is Steve, that's a great, so I understand where you're coming from now. And what I would say is, you don't need to worry about you shouldn't be worried about that. We know the inventory, like I said, people are not gonna be able to install certain things and then claim funding. That's just not the way that we're setting things up. Now, we are, I would maybe differ a little bit with you in saying that the lower end stations, I would disagree that they have no value. I think they have some value. The value is different than professionally installed networking station. And, we need to understand that, that growth curve is gonna come whether we like it or not. So it behooves us to kind of be aware of it, work on it, expose that data to the research community so they can understand the strengths and weaknesses, because it's coming whether we want it or not. But that kind of effort is not going to be anywhere near what a professional Mesonet is getting.
So, well, if I'm reading you, then what you're saying is that the professional or professional plus categories do not contain that kind of single like sensor pack kind of.
Correct. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, no, the professional and professional plus tiers, which is where the vast majority of the state, almost all of the state and commercial Mesonets are in professional or professional plus. Those stations, I will not get into that yet. The lower end stations operated in a different manner won't go into that category.
Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, and I think there are categories where that may fall into. We call them automated personal station networks, manual personal station networks. So I think that was the intent of capturing those types of stations. Maybe the name is not perfect, but that was, I think, that's it.
And if there are suggestions for parameters for the future that we should be considering, get them to advisory board members, and they'll bring them up at the next meeting.
Verifying from you guys.
Well, so that it gets to kind of in the survey that maybe Nathan was talking about. We are not asking for a lot of details about what specific sensors and equipment you have. We're asking whether you have a sensor that does it. And in terms of verifying it, as Dave was asking, certainly for now, it's a self-reporting system, and for all of the partners in this network, we're comfortable that, we're all professionals here and no one's gonna be kind of gaming the system. At some point, I wouldn't be surprised to see, an NGO or a private sector thing kind of go out and start to do surveys of stations and things like that. Right now, we're confident, NWS is confident that the data we're putting in there is good. Now, as we get into more, personal weather station type of things, that's a whole different ballgame. But again, so there's not going to be any kind of significant amount of compensation on that. And, there can be sort of a little, you'd almost start from for the professionals, it's like, we believe you until you prove us otherwise. It'll almost flip the other way for a personal weather station. Prove to us, or demonstrate through some manner that your station really, is a high quality. And otherwise, you kind of have to be a little more nervous about it. But those are the kind of things, those stations are coming. We want to be involved with that at a sort of an experimental and research level, so we can understand what's going on and help the community, the enterprise, make, integrate that data in the most appropriate way.
So will the new reporting tools, I saw the graphic in there, will that just be looking at tracking the number and the uptime, or does that help out with some of the issues?
It'll be an evolving tool. Certainly to start out with, it's gonna be looking at raw numbers and, stations and data reports and things like that. Eventually, and that's, again, we'd like to get feedback from the field of, what would it be helpful to you to see that we can include in our reporting, capability.
I think we need to wrap up there and move on to the next segment, but thank you very much, guys. So Kevin? So up next is, Kevin Kelly with our Washington update. Thank you, the board, appreciate that, guys.
You advance it?
Yeah. Or you can use that on your own if you want, right there as well. Yeah, great.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. And can you all hear me fine? Yep. Okay, online. So this is my return trip to this Augusta meeting, and I think it's very good to get everybody together because I think you are the key element to this program, and to our partners that are not personal attendants here in Phoenix. It's very important because you all, as we've been saying all along, you are the stories that create the narrative that drive the investment. So I think that's really important. I want to emphasize that as we go along. I think as I told some of you last year, I studied to be a priest for 11 years, so I was in the seminary from high school through almost getting ordained. Capuchin Franciscans, and they in the seminary they taught you communication skills, right? Unlike maybe the diocesan priests, but the Capuchins, they from 9th grade on, communication is very important. And when we got closer to ordination, they actually gave you the metaphor about how you use stories to give a frame of reference for the people you're speaking with, whether it's one-on-one or from the pulpit on Sundays, to be able to give them that frame of reference that drives a positive outcome. So anyway, and I also know, since I'm the last speaker, as the homilies, it's like, hey, you want to make sure they can get out the door to the parking lot. So I'll be trying to be as brief as possible. But that's very important, that underlying current. Whether you're in Nebraska or New Mexico or Florida or somewhere else in the heartland, whether you're in Dixie Alley or whether you're in a in the hurricane venue or whether you're up in the mid-Atlantic portions of the country, it's very important because weather, as we all know, affects so many of people's lives, right? As I said this last year, everybody checks on it first thing in the morning. Politicians and their staffs are no different. And I do think the discussion that we just had about with the advisory panel about the high quality data, driving analytics. I mean, again, the Mesonet, we didn't really conceive of it in that concept way back when, in 2005, but it really is big data for weather, right? You collect more information from more places and provide the frame of reference. And there's always big fights about which one's more valuable than not, and that's something we need to talk about going forward as a community to advocate for professionalizing the evaluation of things today. Because, the way the government does it today, they have an observations science council, right? It's called the No Observations Science Council. It's headed by Neil Jacobs, right? He's the number 3 guy in the department. And frankly, the Mesonet always scores very high, top 10. A lot of the satellite observations are ridiculously not in the ballpark. It costs, many orders of magnitude more to build and deploy, but they're not that good for weather prediction. Now, I will tell you, the government doesn't always want people to know that. And that's the tension in this program as we push forward on this. So I do think that's important for us to be able to push that, because the Mesonet data for certain scenarios, as Elizabeth and others have said this morning, it really does play that out. So that's very important. That's our background. You can read that. This will be put on the website or somewhere. But we've been in this in the beginning. We represent a consortium of the team here that we've been doing this for a long time. So we don't have our lane in any one person's court. We try and be, to the degree practicable, honest brokers about how to kind of, for policy and advocacy and for investment. And clearly, we did start the UrbanNet thing, but it all began with that National Academy report, right, from the ground up. We used that. Now, the report had a very complex layer of organizational detail about how they wanted it governed, and way too cumbersome, right, as some academics would be. But the point is that the foundation was the science. It was the beginning of, hey, we aggregate all the information together and we get a better result when we are all working together the data goes in forward. This is funding. We talked about this last year, and, you know, we had a nice bump there in 19, and then 11, sequestration. And 19, that 10 year was also used for 2 years worth of program activity. It wasn't all done for 1 year, but you'll see. So we fought hard to get back up there. And I think we're at a threshold here, and we'll talk a little bit more about where the Congress is on this, about where we go for the next tranche. Because that number, 19, it should be much higher eventually, if we're going to make this right. And we'll talk about how that investment goes. Please interrupt me as you go along if you have questions or comments. So for FY19, which is not resolved, but we actually had a flip this year. You know, the Senate, this has been a Senate-sponsored program largely over the years, but we got the House to actually go up this year, more than 10%. And the reason why is because we convinced Mr. Culberson, happy memory, he got defeated in the blue wave down there in Texas, in Hurricane Beta, as he would describe it. I will tell you, he put an extra tranche of money in. Why? Because he knows from what happened with the floods in Texas and the hurricane that came in, the hurricane in 2017, that they were just devastated down there, and they didn't have good readings, right? So West Texas is better coverage because of the wind industry than East Texas. So the reality is that he put the extra money in there. And so unfortunately, as you know, we're in the shutdown right now. There is not, I can't say there's a path to getting it resolved at this point. So we don't know if we're going to be a full year CR. We don't know if we'll get the House number, whether we get something in between. We just don't know. And unfortunately, until this impasse over the border security matter, which we're all sick of hearing about, right? I know you all stopped last night to watch both the president's 9-minute address and then, of course, the even more telling response by Senator Schumer and Congresswoman Pelosi. They all should have saved us all the airtime. But having said all that, we will know, I would say, within the next, but before the State of the Union, we should, which is January the 29th, we should know what's going on for this year going forward. The next year's budget, FY20, it normally comes up on the first Monday in February, unless the Monday is the first. But I think it'll be late because of the shutdown. But we expect, because FY20, so, you know, going back to 2011, when we had the guillotine there from sequestration, well, what happened was they have operated every year since then in these 2-year agreements for spending, right, for the appropriated dollars. And so the last 2-year cycle ended in FY19. We have 2 more years to go for the for the FY 2011 law that set these spending caps. So we're looking at them coming up in the budget request with a very bad number for us, as they have before. And, you know, it's always a chicken and the egg problem we have with NOAA and the Weather Service. And we have great respect and affection for them, but somewhere higher up in NOAA, we're struggling, right? The CFO's office is not a friend. I'm just going to say that up front. I know the government's not here, but the point is that that's a problem. We've got a problem inside the administration. Now, we have good news is we have a new science advisor, Kelvin Drogelmeyer from Oklahoma. You all know him. I'm sure many of you know him. He is a meteorologist, and he likes the Mesonet program. He knows all about the Mesonet program because he oversaw the investment in Oklahoma. And, of course, as we all affectionately refer to the Oklahoma Mesonet, that's the platinum standard, right, of Mesonets around the country. So, although we understand from our friends in New York this morning, they are quickly trying to equal that in both scale and complexity.
Have to be cool and exceeded.
So we have this conundrum, which creates.
You're no longer New York.
New York.
So we're going to have our hands full in going forward in FY20, not just because of the budget, and of course then, as you know, we have a new Congress, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm not going to go through each member and so forth. But the bottom line is the way appropriations get done, the budget comes out, people go into their individual member of Congresses, they petition them to actually do something to make an adjustment or to fight for something extra, and then they make requests to the committees on appropriations. So each year, now that we have a bigger consortium, we have been asking you all to engage collectively and individually in making these requests. And we have materials that we distribute, and of course the website, which we did push heavily for, is excellent in terms of information. And then if you have a member of Congress or the member of the House or Senate who is particularly important for the course of the success of the Mesonet, we actually have been building out individual state fact sheets that outline why it's important. So we've done stuff in Texas, and we've done stuff in Alabama, and we'll be doing things up in New England, and we'll probably be doing additional states as time warrants or as time requires, because the point is, again, you want to give people a picture of what they're paying for and why this is important. And again, as we increase the program line, you know, we've always said it's three things, right? It's denser coverage in the states and in the locality, right? It's to buy more coverage, with obviously coming from a private partner, whether that's a university or a state or a company. Secondly, it's for new observations, different kinds of observations referred to, and that's a big challenge for us because NOAA cannot solve the Forrest Gump problem for us on this, on new observations, right? Where does Earth end and heaven begin? They don't have a good process for that. The NOSC has a workshop about new observations. I was just reading about it before I stood up here. They're having a workshop, government reopening, God willing, in early March in College Park to talk about this. But the reality is, it doesn't say, well, we're going to qualify in the following observations through this process. It's not like the Department of Homeland Security, where if you're going to introduce a new machine to test for chemical detection at airports, you go through this ridiculous process. But they actually go through, and then you get on the qualified product list. There's nothing like that today in the weather space. And effectively, and we would not want something as cumbersome as the DHS does, but the reality is that that's what we need when we say we need new observations. So whether it's drones or whether it's profilers or it's other assets that can be used to create some new measure of analysis by which we feed data in that improves the predictive models or alternatively the forecasts, that's what we're looking for. And then the third tranche of money needs to be for building local state capacity. And I say that in the basis of, not necessarily through the state government, but capacity in a locality. You've got to induce them to do it. You've got to put, you know, these localities, these states with the state climatologists and with the state legislatures, you've got to get them to put more skin in the game. That's how we're going to get more coverage. It's not going to be Washington that's going to, you know, propose something hugely dramatic where it's going to offend their own, the federal Mesonet per se. We're going to rely upon the locality. And you got to find a way to induce them to get in there. And that's kind of messy, those three things. So we don't have a good formula today as a group. That's why this advisory board is very important, in my opinion, for helping us assess, okay, what's the mix? What should be the appropriate mix going forward? Where should it be done? I mean, what's 100% Mesonet coverage? It differs in what's in Colorado versus what you need in Arkansas, probably. I'm just saying. I mean, just based upon the topography, the kind of precipitation and severe weather patterns you get, and other things along the line. California, I tell you, it's all about it's all wildfires all the time, right? And that's a big deal. We've introduced that as a new concept this year with people on the Hill. Why? Because it's front and center. I mean, the crazy thing with the whole fight about climate and all that, the one thing that Congress always knows, when you're talking to the most conservative member from, you know, pick a red state that is on the more of the denier side of the climate science, you look at the cost of these severe weather events. We owned a home in West Virginia. I owned a home in West Virginia out at the Greenbrier for a number of years. We sold it 2 summers ago, thank God. But we had a 1,000-year flood in southeastern West Virginia. It's the one that, you know, when they rained out the golf course there. I mean, it came up, and it must have been 50 feet above the creek bed level. It almost took out my neighbor's foundation of his house. I mean, and it was just, it's crazy. So if you go into Joe Manchin, part of the coal industry there, Shelley Moore Capito, and say, well, you know, we need coverage. Those people, we had people that were washed out from White Sulphur Spring, they died. And they found bodies 200 yards from our home. And so you say, well, they had no warning. They had no clue that there was this, you know, training cell storm that came through. A good mesonet would have helped give them some availability that something was mounting. It's like, get everybody the hell out of there. I mean, I have lots of friends out there who almost died because they got caught in these incredible flash floods. So if you give people a picture like that and tell them, hey, we've got to get better coverage like that. But today, as a group, and even the companies, and I think they try and do their very best with Dr. Moore kind of as the overallist science czar from OU, the reality is we don't have a good, precise model on how to grow investment here. And that's what we really need your help with, along with advocacy. So, you know, there has been tension. Well, you know, somebody getting more than they should, whatever. There are all those equities that are out there, and that's on the table. But the reality here is you have my commitment, and somebody who, I believe in this stuff. I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I believe in it. That's the last thing you accuse me of being in any way, shape, or form. Although, you know, science and religion, I would say, you know, I went to the Basilica yesterday to see it, you know, and they were having the mass in there because, hey, remember, science and religion are not inconsistent. So, you know, God, you know, somebody started, you know, there was the first principle before there was the Big Bang. So, so I just tell you that. But the point is that we're going to need your help. But as we build this process out, it's important to know that you do have a voice through this advisory committee, and we want to work out long-term to grow this so the tranches grow. I mean, we're going to ask for $25 million, I think, in FY 20, and the bottom line is, so this is all about the, you know, what the Armageddon we're facing here. So this is the schedule, as you see right here, for going forward. But I think, you know, from our standpoint, we need to talk about how this program is going to grow. So if we go from 19 to 25, from 22 to 25, how will that money be spent? You know, between those three tranches of activity, very important to figure that out as we go forward. So I think it's really important also, as we say, these are kind of the key points as you look going forward. They summarized many of the things I've said already. But that number 3 point, I think the number 2 and 3 are very important in the sense that, one, this is a very cost-effective way to get weather observation. Because the federal government could never do this on its own. It doesn't have the capital. NOAA doesn't have the budget. The Weather Service doesn't have the budget. I mean, the whole Weather Service observations line is only about $240 million. So we're not even 10% at this point. Now, my view is it should be 350 and we should be 100 or 400. I mean, I don't know. But I mean, the point is they integrate new data sets into these things independent of the satellites, which the satellites, they're kind of still, they're out there. And then the second thing is these vertical sectors. That, I think, actually more than the severe weather, with some offices and some staff, actually is the way to talk about this program, about how it enhances agriculture or wind energy, transportation, whatever, some of the insurance issues there. I can tell you, back in my first assignment as a lobbyist, after I left the Senate in 1995, we were hired by Hughes Electronics to help save the Earth Science satellite programs at NASA, which were facing big cuts from the new Republican Congress. And the way they proposed these huge, terrible cuts in the House. And we used the Senate as a firewall, but I'll tell you, I was not allowed to lobby. I had a one-year ban because of my employment in the Senate. It really go back to the people that controlled the money. So we were hired to actually get ag groups, forestry groups, fishing groups, others to kind of go up and say, this really is important for us, for our business. And it was very coarse at the time in terms of the analytical data, much less so than today. In the end, what saved us? We ended up getting a couple of insurance associations and a bunch of insurance companies to write a letter to the chairman of the House subcommittee that oversaw NASA that year, who was a former insurance agent. And they said, you know, we need this for severe weather, for mitigating risk and for understanding the consequences, and for us to really do a risk-adjusted rating system in all the markets that we're in throughout the country. You know what? That cut went away because they heard from those local folks. It was those verticals, and that does make a difference. So that's one of the things in each of your states, to think about that, to be more precise, to drill down on that. That's really very, very critical, and I would encourage you to think about that as we go forward. We want the partners to play more of a role. We'll certainly help you with logistics, scheduling, and so forth. We know that for those of you who are with universities, you just don't necessarily are not always allowed to go traipsing up to Capitol Hill and see your member of Congress or your member of the Senate because, the university is somewhat sensitive about them, what logos are used for what papers that have the official thing on. So we're not looking for people to do end runs, okay? That's not what we're about. Having said that, we do actually want you to work on this whole strategy and to work with your university, if you are based in a university, to work with them as a going forward basis to try and get permission to kind of be engaged with us going forward. That's what I said earlier about the mix on things and the growth plan, because we want to be a $100 million program. Just saying. I don't see why this program shouldn't be $100 million. I mean, they spend how much on the satellite? Billions of dollars every year. I mean, from this standpoint, we're the non-satellite data feed into the Weather Service and to know for weather kind of type observation. So on a proportionate basis, it's a fraction, just a fraction. And so the question is, how do we aggregate in things like that? And how do you justify it? Again, what's 100%? If we have a truly network of networks for the entire country, what does it look like? And then how do we articulate it so that you can buy it by the yard? That's what you have to be able to do, right? Because you're not going to go up and say, give us $100 million. They look at you, I don't know. I don't want to be thrown down too many flights of stairs in each request that we make with members and the committee staffs in particular. But the point is, we need to be thinking about how we build that up. So we got to get to 25 first. When we get to 25, what do we do with 30? And so forth. And build that out. But that's where we got to be looking, and that's where you are very, very valuable and important to us going forward. Timeline, obviously, we'd like to get visits, and we need letters. That's very important. And then we're going to try and work on getting, potentially for people who are not on the Appropriations Committee, getting a sign-on letter potentially this year, certainly for the House in particular. We have white papers, talking points, so forth. We have a whole set of a toolkit, essentially, for each of you to use. We actually have a breakdown on it. It's now, if you look on the website, there's data on there about how it applies in each of the different regions of the country. And again, if we have a member or senators that are important, really kind of uber important to the future of the program, we can do a targeted state-based initiative, white paper, kind of a handout that kind of summarizes that in addition to what we do for the generic advocacy. Next steps here, if you're at the university, talk to your government relations. We'll have a white paper ready to go here shortly, I think. I don't know, we want to wait, obviously, until we know what 19 looks like before we finalize it. And then, Bill and Steve have been the primary liaisons to all of you, the partners, and certainly the university community, to look at how we get meetings set up over the next 2 to 3 months. 4 months, 4 is a little too late, I think, but we put that in there just in case. And then, obviously, end of February, we want those requests to go in. So we're, 7 weeks out from that. But we don't really have a good schedule of when they are actually going to be saying the deadline for getting member requests in. I'm thinking probably around St. Patrick's Day, which means most offices say, hey, you got to be in by March 1st. So that's effectively, we got to be in the queue with them by the end of February in some way, shape, or form. So that's that. Under schedule. So Buck, don't make the question too long.
Yeah, you don't make the answer too long. Yeah, we go Buck. I'm not sure it's for online. So you mentioned that the NOAA official budget request was very small, much smaller than our budget for the program. I think it's 6.5 or $7.5 million. So this has been true for years, and it's gotten to the point now where Louis and Neil and people like that are both expressing their extreme satisfaction with the program, its value, and the money spent, and still being also at the same time very clear that in their budgeting process, which is a little bit of a game, they are lowering our number
partially because they know that we're always advocating on the Hill and we can get it raised, which is not true of their internal programs. So this is like a, you know, some reverse chicken and egg thing that is starting to make all of us involved insane. Do you have any recommendations how everyone in this room could help change that area?
I think we actually have to call them out on that. If you ask my opinion, and I know there's some risk in that because they're the customer, so we have to be very judicious about that, but the partners don't have to be as much. I mean, what is that old biblical adage? Not by their recent words, but by their deeds shall ye know them. And I do think, you know, so we can get members to request that they put the right number in the budget. But I mean, I do think one of the things to think about, and this is something, frankly, that we have been kicking around, and I also, they're not part of the Mesonet, but we work for UCAR, University Corporation for Atmospheric Research in Boulder. I work for them as well. They have for some time, and I think our folks have come to the same recognition, our corporate partners and Variant, we can talk to this if we want. You know, we need to get in place kind of a decadal survey for weather, separate from the earth science thing that's done largely for NASA. We need to get a decadal survey for weather because I think there's an obsession with the satellite data. That's NOAA's bias. That's certainly NESDIS's uber alles preference, and it drives so much of the investment. And the cost management there has been, you know, over many years. It's nothing to do with the current team. It's been very choppy. So I think we need something to give us a benchmark that says the Mesonet, you know, is in the top 10 by the NOAA Observation Science Council. It's always ranked in the top 10. So why isn't it funded in the budget request like it's in the top 10? Well, guess what? They don't publish the NOAA Observation Science Council, the NOS, doesn't actually publish their evaluation of all of these observations. It's not, go look on their website after the shutdown. They don't publish it. It's like it's a classified document. I don't know what that's about, but you know, we've got to get more transparency, I think, Buck, into the quality of the observations. And then I think, you know, with Neil and with Louie, I think you have to be like, hey, this is a good program. It's a pittance in terms of the dollar amount, and we're never going to get to the scale we want and introduce an orderly fashion these new observations or build capacity for the states if you don't give us a base program that's at least equal to what it was in the enacted appropriations. That's my view.
Kevin, two questions. One, when we when the government's back open, do you foresee disaster monies flowing in the same way that Jerry and others benefited from in New York? And secondly, is there an opportunity to go to other agencies? If you look at Jerry's list of users, agriculture was, you know, an important user. Would there be a way of using that type of argument to? I know we've thought about this with land.
We have. And the challenge, of course, is somebody will have to tell them they have to do it. And then the question is, how do you calculate the investment that would be proportionate to their utilization? I mean, I think that's, you know, on the other hand, the Weather Service does not charge the Department of Agriculture for giving them the information that they use to determine whether there's a drought in southeastern United States or California. So I think that's a challenge. I certainly think it's, you know, if we had this decadal survey, I do think, again, we need a baseline scientifically that says, here's how, if you want to get more accurate weather observations and more predictives, we're all sick of hearing about the Europeans. You know, how do you do that? Well, here's the schedule and investment curve that you need to do that, and then maybe we can do that accordingly. But you know, the Department of Agriculture has, you know, they're in the same boat. They're struggling for money, just like NOAA and the Department of Commerce is. So,
how about the disaster money?
I mean, I think there will be more disaster money coming. I mean, because of these events. The question is, for example, in Texas, you know, getting the politicians down there because they have so much damage, to think about requiring some level of what would you call it, coast resilience planning, where a mesonet would be seen as an a priori need for resilience, like what New York did after Sandy. I I mean, you had precursor activity there that obviously was the initial raison d'etre for thinking about this, but it was only the Sandy money that really drove, hey, we need something like this. We're way behind the curve on this. And I think, that's maybe where we could go to people that oversee the disaster relief program and say you need a resilience component. If you are a state coming in after a big event, you need a resilience strategy. And that has to include things like, an organized set of surface observations for weather forecasting and prediction and data collection. That may be one of the ways we do that, which then you would have FEMA effectively through the states paying for this. I mean, sometimes when they give these big checks in disaster management, there's a lot of like, well, gosh, we have all this extra money. What are we going to do with it? I mean, it's not that they, don't have lots of things to lean on, but I can tell you, after Sandy in particular, there was, New York, Connecticut, a number of them had a lot of different buckets of money that they gave to universities to kind of implement various kinds of activities. So that's maybe one way we could approach that.
So I recognize we are past time. If anybody needs to leave, I understand, but since we have Kevin here, want to keep the questions going. We have room till noon, so.
Sure, this is a crazy question, but, I guess the whole thing about when you look at weather, as a service being delivered, when you need to get down to a level of granularity, correct me if I'm wrong, we deliver this data to NOAA, National Weather Service, and then they take it and they apply their techniques to create more accurate forecasting?
Yes, it's built right into it's a single data feed now. It didn't used to be, but now it's all built into what the forecasters seeing at the weather is built on.
So a lot of their information is based on atmospheric type information. I don't think there's another group out there that's actually invested as much money in building infrastructure and actually paying to develop technology to actually provide more accurate weather than this group right here. And one of the questions I'm thinking is that, when you start to see the shift towards where weather is not adequate for the connected vehicle market at this point in time, getting down to 500-meter grids, this type of thing. I'm trying to look at how we differentiate ourselves together and make our value proposition stronger, and wondering if it would be possible to preempt and package the data ahead of time for the National Weather Service, where in effect we've got a much higher granular, higher accurate platform and modeling product that they have. And I'm talking about moving that in. I don't know how many people are using machine learning or data analytics, but that's something we're doing. The ability to be able to predict, like getting the data and getting important data, and that's what we have to recognize about what we have here. And it's not just ordinary, free proxy data that everybody, all the large weather companies use. There's sweat and blood into this, and I think if we come up with a strategy to package something ahead of time that even the National Weather Service can't do without our data, but we use what we've got to show them how good we are and get due consideration for our work. Just a suggestion.
I'm certainly open to looking at that. I think the question is whether you get, they always want the raw data, but what you're talking about is, besides the Mesonet, you're talking about like, a micro Mesonet that actually has even far more particularity in terms of its utilization. And I don't think that's a bad idea whatsoever. I mean, I think that's one of the things we've sold this on with people going forward is that, hey, they put out a warning for Fairfax County, Virginia. That's a big piece of real estate, and it's not really a very accurate one if you're living in Great Falls or if the storm is down, near Quantico. So that's, I think if you're in Washington, it's kind of a challenge.
I think what Jerry's done is a case study on that, right? So with the freeway there, right? The problem with the highway funding, right, is it's all block granted out from DOT to the state. So the state and DOT have control of that dollars, and so it's a state by state effort to make
Doesn't
that happen.
Federal Motor Highways have any money to push?
Well, maybe a little bit of research. There might be some research or seed money or SBIR, but in terms of a large dollar to really help build capacity of a network, right, that's going to come from the state DOT.
But that's something that with the next highway bill, that would be something for us to look at, which will be up in another, I don't know, 2 years.
What the National Weather Service has, that they're not trying to commercialize, is a product for the connected, car market, where you've gotta have ground level information, you've gotta have, a very tight grid, so that, basically, weather today is not designed to handle autonomous vehicles, and that's still their biggest challenge. And I think we can solve a lot of that just in our own little group here by meshing a lot of this data together and using predictive analytics to actually create something that would put us light years ahead in an industry where a lot of people are jumping into it thinking, they're coming in late going, wow, we know there's a lot of money here, but they don't have a tax.
I agree. Now, the one caveat I'll say on the autonomous vehicle market, there's been a big fight in Washington about that particular, how to allow the next level, a whole bunch of additional vehicles. There's a small cap on, in law right now, it says you can only have, a few tens of thousands of these vehicles on the road at this point. And so the whole goal is to raise that ceiling in stages. And of course, the auto companies and the House, in the last Congress, passed a bill that would advance all state and local laws, and then it got to the Senate, and they ran into California, and if you talk to cities and all that, they're very protective of not having Washington preempt their control. That to be said, I do think this group, again, if there are certain products that you can pull together and do, again, you're gonna be working from the ground up because you're all in the localities, right? You are constituent base. Most of these networks and our companies that are involved have the same thing because their stations are in particular locations, so.
And then you've got millions of vehicles out there right now that can mesh that data across what we have and do the analysis. And I would have to think it become the most precise, weather system in the business.
For the transfer, I think it's a good target for transportation.
Yeah, it is.
And the weather community has let the transportation industry down.
Yeah.
I mean, you wanna know when the black ice is coming up. If you're carrying 250,000 pounds of load behind you, every second counts. That's where atmospheric modeling or predictions are not gonna give them that kind of situational awareness. And I think that's what our strength is here, to become the best at what we do.
And I think the same could be said of agriculture as well.
Absolutely.
Transportation and agriculture.
Yeah, very good. Yes, sir.
Kevin, 3 quick things. Kevin Clay, Oklahoma Mesonet. The Texas thing is fascinating because with Harvey and then the political clout there, Governor Abbott just from his office released this massive report called Rebuild Texas. And although they don't ever use the word climate change, they use future proofing 44 times in that document. But there's an entire chapter about setting up special committees, et cetera, for state and local partnerships to help future-proof Texas against flood events on a watershed basis. I mean, there's Mesonet ties literally throughout this particular document. Second thing is the National Climate Assessment, the Southern Great Plains chapter included Mesonets as an important piece in the future development of Mesonets, going forward. And of course, Southern Great Plains chapter was Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas. Third thing, just to thank you, the platinum comment is interesting that you made about the Oklahoma Mesonet, because one of the cool things about platinum is the longevity. The Oklahoma Mesonet will be celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. We have a number of activities planned. We're going to be preparing professionally done video vignettes from stakeholders that could be brought to bear on some of these advocacy things. And our local public television station also wants to do a 30-minute documentary on Mesonet, which should air sometime in May. So we'll be able to bring all of these to the website and all of those kinds of things, Elizabeth, to you as well. So thank you for this comment.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Kevin. I don't know if there's any more questions or not, but before we go any further, I just wanted to summarize a couple of things and get a question on the table that came in online. But just in summary, real quick, there was a call for a few letters, commitment letters, for the recompete coming up. We will be reaching out to everybody, and giving a template for that, and there's probably prior art relative to your organization that can be drawn upon. Advocacy letters, Kevin was just talking about in terms of our upcoming cycle for the program, and similarly advocacy visits. And the question online was if any university partners or any partners, I suppose, across the board can get authorization to come, can the NMP help pay for travel costs? And I think the answer is perhaps, maybe, we'll do our best. I would say reach out to myself or Steve and let us know your situation, and we will do our best to try to help you get there to Washington to get up onto the Hill with us.
The flip side of this is to invite the members and the staffs to see your mesonet in locus parentis. I mean, just to actually come out and see it in working. I mean, you know, and yes, it's okay, but I mean, kind of give them a picture, have a little forum, get the folks from the ag community or the renewable energy or transportation, whatever it is, to kind of say, hey, let's do this. I mean, if we got Chuck Schumer's state director in New York to study this, you know, to come out and see this, or his folks from, you know, wherever upstate that would be the most likely to benefit, or Nita Lowy. I mean, again, I'm not citing New York for the sake of the fact that they have two of the most powerful people in Congress and who's asking. But the point is that if you could do that, that seeing is believing, because a lot of states, Barry and I were up on the Hill last Friday talking to some folks from the Oklahoma delegation, and one of them, a chief of staff or a pretty senior member, said they have a video conference with the local office every week, and that they tell them kind of what they're doing. And so that didn't happen. When I worked on Capitol Hill, we did not have video conferences with our local offices. And so they're doing that because, again, what's going on? What are you hearing? What's of value? Because sometimes the staff people in Washington are ambitious 20-somethings who have no connection to the district or state from which the member is elected. So, you know, doing something locally is a good alternative if they don't have the time or the resources to come to Washington. Because we know everybody wants to come to Washington. It's such a great place to be these days.
Anna, if you want to open up the conference line there, if anybody online wants to chime in at this point, please feel free to do so. We're going to unmute everybody. Are there any more questions from the audience here in the room? All right. Well, not hearing any, Kevin, thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming out and advising us. And thank you all for spending time with us this morning. What you do is extremely important, and hopefully you see that reflected here and how the program is growing and being received in DC and around the country with all of your local constituencies as well. Buck, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Just add one thing. Thinking about the subject of transparency. And, you know, last year I was the guy presenting and talking about how this was a competitive program, and that meant that not everything could be completely transparent. And this year I was the guy in the back of the room listening to things, and I was actually frustrated by the fact that everything isn't completely transparent, particularly like we talked about the formulas, but there was no details on exactly what they are yet. So I just want to make sure that we're on track, the track we laid out before, to really reach a state of complete transparency where the formulas are laid out to everybody in this room, everybody who's part of the program. And I think, if I recall, the goal was really to do that after winning this next competitive bid. For those that are under NDA, like the board members, that's already occurring. So I just wanted to double check that we're on track with that, because I do think it's extremely important. Yeah, we're on track. We're making layers more transparent. We plan on getting full transparency. And I think that's great progress, and thanks for pointing it out. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess we can.